Light from Lantern presents
Knit a Spell.
I'm Magical Maker, Katie Rempe.
And I'm the maker of magic, James Devine.
Join us as we stitch together the symbiotic relationship between crafting
And the craft.
Hey, how you doing, Jim?
I'm great, Katie. How are you?
I'm doing really well, especially because this week we have a super special guest, and that guest is Ana Campos from Circle of Stitches! Yay!
Yay, this is so awesome.
Let me tell you a little about Ana. She is a practicing witch, a tarot reader and teacher. She's a yarn dyer, knitwear designer, and owner of a local yarn store which happens to sell magical items as well, called Circle of Stitches, located in Salem, Massachusetts. Welcome, 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 Ana!
Yay.
Thank you for having me and for the very warm welcome.
All right. Yeah.
Of course, of all places,
Right.
you're in Salem, Massachusetts. It's like the perfect location for this
Yes.
type of place, right?
Salem's pretty
Everything's-
wonderful.
Yeah.
Everything's magical in Salem.
Speaking of which, were you originally from Salem? How did you find your way to this?
No,
awesome place?
I'm actually originally from Brazil.
Oh.
That's why my name is Ana and not Anna.
Okay.
I was born in São Paulo, Brazil. And when I was a teenager and I bought my first Laurie Cabot book in a bookstore at the mall in Brazil, there was the picture of, Laurie looking all magical and wonderful on Essex Street in her black robes. And I was like, I'm going to go there one day and I'm going to study with her. And,
As you do.
so, yeah, as you do as a teenager. And, so I just sort of made life decisions that brought me here. When I finished high school back in Brazil, I applied to college in the US. I went to college in Connecticut. I moved to Boston for grad school. And then during grad school, I moved a little further north to Salem. So I kind of made my way in stages up here.
That's awesome. Talk about
Oh, that's
manifesting your dreams.
amazing. Yeah, totally. Well, Laurie Cabot we're a big fan of Laurie Cabot in this house. And even my husband is a second degree
Oh.
with Cabot. And so, yeah, we're big fans and love
Yeah,
her
I'm a
so
third degree
much.
Cabot witch. So, I did come and study with her.
It's
So cool.
fantastic.
Gosh, this is what I'm going to have to do a little research on this afterwards.
Oh.
Yes. Very excited
Yeah,
to learn more.
We
Gosh.
have a big painting of the crystal wheel. So Laurie Cabot, for everyone who doesn't know, Laurie Cabot is was really big, especially in the 70s. And she became sort of this phenomenon where this image of she was a big image in sort of breaking through the stereotype of what a witch is, and did a lot of work just by being in the public sphere and on television of sort of taking the stigma away from witchcraft and saying, I'm a real person, I'm a real witch, and I'm not an evil person. I'm not evil, right?
Mhm.
And so she was on all of the talk shows in the 70s and the 80s and taking her attempt to take away the sensationalization of these images of the witch from Halloween and instead showing that she's a real person. Now, I say that, but also Laurie Cabot is a little bit of a sensationalized person herself with her black robes and her cool hair and her she's pretty.
And her
she's
big giant spiral tattoo on her cheek.
Ooh.
Yeah.
right.
But she became a witch publicly when it was still illegal to practice witchcraft. So she was really paving the way.
Wow.
And she was, a single mother with two daughters, just trying to figure out how she was going to provide for her kids. And so she, that's what she ended up doing. And when you think about this back in the 60s, that was a lot scarier than now.
Yeah.
And especially if we think that we're 2 generations away from women even being able to have bank accounts without a man to sign for it. So, when you think about how close to all that it was, she really did some really amazing things as far as putting herself out there.
Yeah, brave and courageous for sure. Wow. So then magic came first into your life?
Well, so honestly, sort of both things. I was always a really crafty child. I was always painting, doing something, making something. I haven't done just fiber arts. I've done oil painting, I've done illustration. And I grew up with an aunt who was an astrologer and a tarot reader. So that was around as well. So I sort of don't remember those things ever not being around. I was 8 years old when I started crocheting and trying to learn how to knit. And it was at that same age that I got my first tarot deck as well, because I didn't even know what it was, but my aunt said, I read tarot. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I want one. Give me one. So,
You like it, I'll take it.
yeah. And so my aunt told my mom, like, yes, you can buy her one, but make it a small deck. I don't know why, but it was like a little mini deck. I still have it. And we were living in Germany at the time. So it's a German version of the Rider-Waite that's like tiny.
Ooh. Oh, that's so cute. Wow.
That's
Gosh.
amazing.
I'm always so envious of people who have like a magical upbringing where it was normalized,
Well, so yes and no, because the funny thing is my family is actually Catholic. And so my aunt still considers herself Catholic and considers herself a Catholic witch. But she does tarot, she does astrology, but she doesn't sort of cross the religious line, so to say. But for me, I made an active decision to embrace this as my spirituality. So I don't consider myself Catholic anymore. And that's definitely a point of contention, even though we kind of, meet in the middle with the tarot.
Yeah, it's funny how that ends up working somehow. Yeah.
Ana, can I ask, how did Laurie Cabot inspire you? Like, what was it about her? Like, walk us through a little bit of that journey of like, how did you see her in Brazil, and what was it that inspired you?
Well, so, even though I grew up with tarot and astrology, I didn't have a ton of information outside of, Christianity as far as what your options are for how you pursue spirituality. And I very early on in my life became very frustrated at the idea that women couldn't be clergy, and that there was kind of a limit to what you could do in ritual space, because I loved ritual. I wanted to be an altar girl, and I wanted to wear a robe, and I wanted to ring the big fancy bell that we have, and I wanted to do that. Like, the ritual really fascinated me. And just even as a kid, the idea that women couldn't be sacred and that women were lesser than, I was just like, I don't know about that. And so I, when I started getting more into tarot and all those things, like, I learned about chakras. So then I started doing chakra meditations and doing this and doing that. And, if resources were limited as far as media in the US, in Brazil, there was even less, So I, like, every bookstore that I walked in, I'd find like the tiny occult section and be like, hey, what is it? Like, what am I going to buy today? So I just studied everything that I could. And, Laurie's book, I still have the original copy from Brazil. She signed it for me eventually, which, made it more special. But I found that in the bookstore, and the cover was purple, which is my favorite color. So I was already like, ooh, and it's, it says Power of the Witch on it. So like, how do you not, like, you're like a 16-year-old girl, like, trying to find her spirituality, and it's like purple book that says Power of the Witch. Like, of course I want that.
Yes.
Right.
Come right in.
And,
Totally.
but also just, her story of living in Salem openly as a witch and deciding that she could be who she wanted to be, that was really appealing to me. And so coming to Salem always sort of felt like a journey to get to a place where I could just be me. That's really what was appealing.
Wow. So she represented what to you? She represented power, obviously, the book, right?
Yeah, power, independence, like freedom to be yourself, and to like feel empowered as a woman, to really kind of, get away from a culture that was oppressive to women in a lot of ways. Yeah, obviously I have a complicated history with Catholicism and sexism and whatnot, but growing up in South American culture is also very heavily sexist still. There's a lot of machismo. And so, there was the appeal of getting out of a culture that was not supporting me the way that I needed to, but also sort of getting away from the religious constraints that I had. And so it was just sort of like, that's the freedom. I can go to Salem and I can be a witch and I can do whatever I want. Like, that was,
Right.
and seeing Laurie doing that here sort of gave me a place to go, like, well, if she already did it there, then when I go, like, it's going to be a little bit easier because she's already kind of paved that path.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Are you finding yourself able to do that? How are you finding that what are some of the ways in which you feel like you're achieving some of that?
Well, so the interesting thing is that I know that one of the things that you folks wanted to talk about was, um, what did I think about creating a business that brought together knitting and magic stuff? Like, how did I think that would be a successful business? And honestly, like, no, I didn't go into it thinking that's what I was going to do. The funny thing is that people talk to me and they go, "Oh, your brand, your vision," and I'm like, I am making it up as I go along. Like, there was never like a great big plan. I used to work as an architect and I was not happy and I wanted to work for myself. And I used to knit to like de-stress, and then I just had too many things, so I started selling them. And then I realized I'm really bad at selling finished pieces. Like, I'm not into fashion, so I can't be like, this color will transform your life. Like, I can't, like, that's not my thing. And so I was like, but I understand people who like knitting. So I started writing knitting patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started dyeing yarn. And so, it just sort of turned into a thing where I realized, like, well, this is what I want to do full time. And so I left architecture, I opened my shop. But the interesting thing in Salem is that I feel like there's very much a divide between sort of like old Salem and new Salem in a way. Like, there are people who have lived here a long time. The townies, unfortunately, they've lived here a long time and they don't necessarily like the way that Salem has grown and changed. And then there is a very vibrant community of, like younger folks who are into witchcraft and came to Salem for that. And there's a very, very welcoming community in that sense, but they're sort of like at odds a little bit. Like, we occupy the same space and it's not always perfect. And the thing is, I opened a knitting store. So I was like, all right. And, I was opening a knitting store already, knowing some local knitters, and they were not witches. And so I was like, all right, I kind of need to make a decision about what side of the fence I'm going to fall on. Am I going to be a air quote normal person, or am I going to be a witch? And so I just opened a knitting store. There was nothing there about it that was witchier. And then I realized it was really silly because every October my business would tank. Because my regulars wouldn't come out because it's packed full of tourists, but the tourists would open the door and go, "Oh, it's yarn," and close the door and leave, I'm like, some of us like yarn. Don't have to say it quite so disdainfully, but be like, "Oh, yarn,"
You don't sell your finished pieces? Bye. Yeah.
Right. Oh, they'd be like, "Oh, will you sell this?" And I'm like, "Well, it's like $400. I'm like, like, but anyway. But I just realized, I was like, people keep coming in here asking me where they can get tarot readings. And I'm a tarot reader and I'm not offering that here. And like, I just sort of realized that from a business perspective, I was missing out, but also from a personal perspective, I felt like, why did I leave a corporate job to still pretend that I'm not a witch? Because I don't want to scare away people that aren't witches who are judging. And so I just kind of like let myself get publicly weirder and see what happened. And the reception's been great, but there was never a point that I was like, oh, well, I want to have a witchy knitting store with this and that. I was just kind of like, well, I love tarot and I like working with independent artists. So I started by focusing on indie published decks so that I could bring it in as like, here's, work by artists that we can bring in, because I was already sort of selling handmade goods. And then it kind of went from there. I started teaching workshops that brought together crafting and magic. So like ritual embroidery, making spell bottles, like making like handcrafting spell dolls. So I was really trying to find the way to bridge like the handcrafts and the witchcraft. And then it just, like most people were okay with it. There are some people who, sent me some very upset messages with Bible verses about, tarot and how they wouldn't come back. But I didn't leave a corporate job to not be me. So I just, I'm just kind of doing the things that I'm passionate about and hoping that there are other people who feel the same way.
Bravo. Good for you for taking the leap. Most people will not do this. I'm sure you've heard many people say, I wish I could do that, which I always find funny because what is so different in our two worlds that you couldn't? It's not like it's an easy choice no matter what. So,
right.
Just takes the balls, sometimes literal balls of yarn to do it. So that's awesome. And I think super, super inspiring. A great, much like you had a really good, mentor person to look at as an example. You're now a great example, I think, to a lot of people trying to do something like that too. So I think you probably agree, right, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on that, bridging, to my sort of more mundane self with my magical self, and always working on bringing those together. So it's completely inspiring to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
to face the backlash and be like, blessings upon you. You know, there's a yarn shop 4 miles that way.
I do admit, I do say blessings upon you when I'm mad at someone. I'm like, blessings upon you. Have a very blessed day.
I totally do that.
I bless you
like,
so much. Yeah.
I bless you so much. The best curses on someone you don't like are, may they be blessed with success so they stay away.
Yes.
I like that.
You had mentioned you work specifically with tarot. Are there any other magical divination tools you like to work with, or is that your mainstay?
For divination specifically, tarot is where I'm like sort of comfortable. Like I've tried studying other things. I tried studying runes. I get them from a spellcrafting perspective, but they don't really speak to me like from a divination standpoint. So for that, yes, tarot is definitely my go-to. I own many, many, many decks.
Oh, yeah, now
I love that. And
importing them too in your shop, I'm sure that makes it easy to expand your supply.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna back this Kickstarter deck, at the wholesale level. One's for me, like,
yeah.
And I love your focus on the indie decks. I mean, I think that's something that's really, it's very challenging for a shop owner to support indie decks. It's so much easier to just have, the New Leaf. So New Leaf is a wholesaling for everyone listening. It's like a wholesaling book, or you can get the Wiser or the Llewellyn wholesale like book and just go through there and order what you want. Whenever shop owners want to do indie decks, they basically have to cultivate an individual relationship with every one of those deck creators. Mm-hmm. And it is like 150 relationships instead of like one relationship with one book with one supplier. So I just want to give you props that that's a ton of work. And there's very few shop owners that are willing to do that. And yet it's so important for indie deck creators to do that, to have someone who's willing to do that. So I know what that's like on the back end. And I'm just like in awe.
Oh, thank you. I mean, at this point, I'm always searching. But at this point, people do email me to tell me about their decks. So I learn from some of them, about some of them that way. So I guess people are starting to know that that's a thing that I do.
It's way cool. It's really marvelous, right?
It's like, going out of your way to find indie dyers for yarn, right? Similar circumstances in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely true with yarn as well. I choose to work with smaller yarn companies. So yeah, I don't just call up a rep and say, show me everything that you have. I don't just go to KFI and just like go through their list of yarns, like I'm talking to the people who make the yarns. And, so there's definitely I talk to a lot of people now that you mention it. As an introvert, that can be a lot sometimes.
For all of our listeners, keep that in mind. These are the types of shops to support, or the shops that actually are supporting indie folks. There's a lot behind it, right? It's really, really cool, and I just really appreciate it. And I see you, Ana. I know what goes into it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Knowing where your dollars
most
are going.
people have no idea sort of what the back end is. They're like, what do you do all day? I'm like, what don't I do all day?
Oh, you mean you don't just knit at your shop all day long?
Oh, honestly, I have to say, I have this one memory. It was during a yarn crawl a few years ago, and I'd been prepping for weeks, like not sleeping, staying up, etc. And then like there was this one moment where the shop emptied out. I sat down for 2 seconds, I knit 2 stitches, and a woman walks in and goes, oh, I wish I could knit for work all day. And it took like all my restraint to not just like scream, because it was like the first 2 stitches that I had knit in like a month, and I'm like, no.
They always know when to say just the right thing, don't they?
Yeah, and people say that all the time. Must be so nice to knit all day. I'm like, must be. I wouldn't.
Must be.
I haven't knit any since I started this business. Yeah.
Oh my God, Ana, you got to listen to our an episode or 2 ago, Katie and I spilled the tea on our businesses, like from when Katie worked, in a yarn shop, and me as a palm reader, and like we're just totally gossiping about all of our most like meaningful and most like infuriating experiences. That would be one of them. We would totally like do that with you and you add that to her story.
Yes. Catch you on the last 2 minutes on your 2-minute break.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I think now is time for a break. What do you think?
Right. I think that's a good idea. We'll take a quick one and we'll be right back.
I just love my dog Pancakes. In fact, she's the reason I designed the little blankie pattern. It's a cute little throw blanket with a hint of magic that's perfect for any baby, furry or not. Truth be told, I've been known to cuddle up with little Blankie myself on a few chilly nights. Don't tell Pancakes. Learn more about Little Blankie and all of my knitting patterns at lightfromlantern.com.
Katie,
Jim.
I've been hearing a lot lately from people how I'm so much more than a palm reader. So I'm cooking something up and I'm going to launch something kind of amazing.
Wait a minute. Are you keeping secrets from me?
Yes. And if you want to know more about it, the first place I'm going to start talking about
It's probably your Instagram, right?
No, actually, that's the last place. It's going to be my email list.
Oh, of course.
I always try to give a little gift with my emails. I hate spam. I hate it when people are just asking me to buy stuff all the time. No, I want to give people a little presents in their email box, a little modern mudra they can use, a little free download they can download, a meditation. I want people to subscribe to my email list so that they get this announcement later this year with my thing that I'm making.
Oh my gosh. Well, you heard it here first. Don't miss out on this awesome upcoming announcement, which you can find on Jim's email list. Hey, Jim, how can people go ahead and sign up for that email list?
Go to thedivinehand.com and hit subscribe at the top in the navigation bar.
It's just that easy. All right, everybody, no excuses. Get on it.
And we're back. So in the second half, I'm interested to know if you might have any particular stories you'd like to share that are maybe like a spiritual experience that you've had a customer, maybe with a class or in a reading that you've had within the store that maybe you'd like to share?
Well, one thing that I think is really interesting is that, a lot of people who come to Salem, they're curious about tarot, they're curious about witchcraft, like they're curious about sort of what they see as a way to have more personal power. But there's always that fear, right? There's that fear of, oh, witchcraft is evil, witchcraft is demon worship. And even if people logically don't believe that, like the fear sort of so ingrained. My store is actually across the street from, a sort of more obvious witch store. And I laugh to myself watching people like do the sign of the cross before walking in. And I'm like, you're walking into a store, like, what do you think's happening? But, the fact that that I offer tarot readings and I do it in an environment that feels sort of less scary, less out of people's comfort zone, mean that I have a lot of people who come to me who don't feel quite safe stepping into those spaces yet. So I help people who are maybe feeling a little nervous because I look more air quotes normal. Like I hate saying that, but I look a little more like a person that they can relate to. Like I don't look like one of the scarier witches, which is funny because one of my friends, Tom Beller, is like, he does tour guide, like he's a tour guide and he's pretty well known, and he definitely like he looks like a witch, and so he gets comments on his YouTube channel like, you look too scary, so like that, no one's afraid to talk to me. And so it kind of gives people a chance to ask questions when they might not feel welcome, or like it's not that they're not welcome, but they might not feel safe doing that somewhere else. So that's been really special to me. I don't know that there's like a specific instance of that I can point out, but it's just sort of that's been kind of the overall vibe, like people will come take a tarot workshop at my shop because, it's bright and there's a bunch of yarn around and they feel safe. It's not a shop where like the walls are all painted black and there's like herbs and things hanging from the ceiling so that they, like it makes people feel just a little more familiar in my space. And so
a little less overwhelming with the attack of smells and senses than the more brightly lit, like you said. It's a little less threatening, even though it's not threatening.
Right, and that's the thing, like I hate to call it that, but I understand that that's how people are perceiving these spaces.
Right.
And so I'm glad that I've been able to create this sort of strange, like, liminal space that my shop is. It's, it's a sort of a weird in-between thing, but it helps people sort of step over that threshold that might not do it otherwise.
Well, and kind of the other way too, I have to imagine it works in your favor in getting new knitters too, because they come in and see, oh wait, it's not just, I'm sorry to say this, a bunch of grandmas. You know, it's also, it's younger people, and look at these cool modern things they're making and the yarns that are available. You know, so maybe people who are more into the magical side, or at least come in thinking they are, could also be interested in that and have a change of mind that way as well. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I've of course been really delighted to see how many people do love both. You know, like every time that I get an online order and it's yarn and tarot together, I'm just like, yes, you know,
it's working.
I am not a knitter, right? So our combo here is me as a person who's a witch, as a person who leads a coven, a lot of experience in witchcraft, and Katie as a person who's a lot of experience, you know, as a fashion designer and as a knitter. And so we're sort of like the peanut butter and the chocolate kind of coming together. But you're already the swirl. You're already the knitter and the witch in one.
I'm the
right?
swirl.
Yeah, you already are. You're already the Reese's peanut butter cup. Already ready, right? So I wonder about like that perspective as the witch who's already a fiber artist to get like in one, about your perspective on, you know, the shop that is knitting supplies plus magical tools, like that combo, right? Like, talk to us about your perspective on that crossover.
Well, I think it all makes sense because, you know, obviously the name of my shop, Circle of Stitches, is a play on Circle of Witches, which is funny because there are people like, I'll say that offhand, and there's someone who's been coming for 3 years went, I never noticed. I'm like, you've been coming here for 3 years. How did you, like, really? You know? But I think that it all falls under sort of this umbrella of mindfulness and sort of sacred community, right? In you know, in times where spirituality was less patriarchal, you know, gathering spaces for women were a lot more common, and there was sacred space for women, and there was intentionality around gathering with elders and passing down of information, right? Like menstrual huts and, you know, doulas. And so like there were like women used to spend time with different generations and sharing in that. And modern life has completely eliminated that. And so where do you get that? Knitting circles, right? That's where women sit and do that and gather. And to me, that gathering of women of multi-generations, that to me is a core part of witchcraft. And so even though people sort of don't see it, like that's not how people, like when people are coming, that's not what they're thinking. To me, that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of like, like, you know, we're like all here sharing energy and exchanging and doing sort of that sacred gathering that, you know, isn't really available anymore. And so I really think that, you know, knitting is a vehicle for mindfulness. I think it is absolutely sort of the perfect palette for spell work. And so I really do think that all these things just like make sense together, at least for me.
Yeah. So is there a way, how would do you ever advise people on how to do magic with knitting? Is there like do you do a little like magic with knitting 101 or something like that in the shop?
I should, you know. You know,
see,
so
every
far,
time, whenever we have a guest on the show, they always leave with ideas. Isn't this ridiculous? So right. Cool.
No, I have like one spell kit that I created that was like a grounding spell, and you knit a pair of socks with these cables, like inspired by tree roots. And I was going to do a whole collection, but then, you know, life happens, pandemics happen, like things like get thrown off the rails. So that's sort of always been part of the goal, you know, to start sort of being more intentional about it. And the funny thing is, like, someone sent me an email being like, hey, do you know of any more like knitting patterns that combine spell work? And I'm like, no, not really, but you know.
Yeah, well, that's the goal in my situation. Yes.
You have a little collab maybe with Light from Lantern, because
yeah.
Oh my gosh, you got those all kinds of stuff. Okay, but yeah, so that's interesting. This is always what since I'm not a knitter, but I'm always like thinking creatively about like, wow, what if you have like a cloak of invisibility? Or like,
I mean, you know, I worked a lot with, you know, Bridget from the Celtic Pantheon, and, you know, Celtic braids are a big thing, braiding in general, doing magic cords with knot work. And I'm like, well, knitting is all knot work. So I sort of see it all as being a little bit ritualistically linked to Bridget. And so, and it's meditative, it's repetitive. So even if you don't have you're not knitting a pattern that wasn't designed to be a spell, that's okay. Like, set your intention for the project because you are spending the time with it as you're working. It doesn't have to be something developed to be a spell,
Yeah.
Yes. We were just talking a few episodes ago about how, being mindful to incorporate colors that maybe, back your certain intention, or when you're casting on saying something, particular, and then doing the same binding off.
Yeah, I had actually made a little color guide, little wheel with colors and planetary associations, and I hung them around my shop near the yard.
There you go. See,
So
very
good.
smart.
Yeah, because Salem being Salem, you can't do tarot readings without being licensed, and they won't give you a tarot license unless you're witchy enough. And they came into my store being like, "Well, you're not really a witch store," and I was like, "Listen, knitting is totally witchy," and so I had to prove to them. And so I was like, "All right, I'm making planetary charts. I'm doing all this stuff to show them that there absolutely is a connection." And I spent, I kid you not, 2 years fighting with them until I finally got a tarot license.
Oh my God.
Wow. This is just local to Salem to have a tarot license like this?
Yes, because, people make money off that. And then they wanted to make sure that it wasn't just like pizza shops and whatever, just doing tarot readings. But then it kind of, I think, got a little too strict. But, where there's money, there's politics.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It's so interesting. I think about chanting. There's so many really great chants, doing a goddess chant or something as you're casting on. What a cool idea. That just occurred to me now as oh, there's 30, if I'm casting on 30 stitches to cast on, if I'm doing a scarf or something, right? That would be really cool to actually do a meditative, chant or something to do that.
If you think of, doing a rosary,
yeah,
instead of
very much
rosary beads, it's, stitches. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was raised Catholic also, so I can totally relate with. I think my Catholic heritage really helped me become a really good pagan. So,
So, I'm on break from my podcast right now, but I have a podcast called Witch City Witches with my friend Becca, and she's also former Catholic, and the vast majority of our guests end up being former Catholics. So there's definitely something there.
It's a
totally
stepping stone.
It's a gateway drug.
It's very witchy. It's,
It is.
My husband was not raised Catholic. He was raised sort of a nice person Protestant, right? So when he went to my grandma's funeral, a Catholic mass, he was like, "Oh my God, this is so pagan." And I was like, "Whoa, this is horrible." But he was super into how pagan it was.
He's like the tourist, "Oh, look at this. Oh, hey, look at that." Yeah.
He was like, "All the saints are like the gods. It's so cool." I was like, "Oh my God, stop."
Yeah. I mean, even with water, we've talked about using water for a blocking ritual, or doing a cleansing spray afterwards, or even doing it with the dye process at the beginning. Have you incorporated any sort of magical making in with your dyeing at all?
So not with anything that I'm selling, but definitely when you're dyeing, using plants that have associations definitely makes sense. Actually, my friend Ash Alberg is probably a better person to speak to about that. They go by Sunflower Knit. They're a natural dyer. They are also a witch, so they definitely would have a lot to say about that. But I definitely, I've sort of realized sort of how witchy my life is overall, because I make my own lotion, so I grate my own beeswax by hand. I'm infusing it with my own herbs. I have herbs in my garden, and so sort of everything kind of is, and that's a thing that I've also worked really hard to try and tell people, is that they're really this separation between sacred and profane doesn't really exist. You can decide to live your whole life sort of in a more sacred way or not. So,
yes,
there's always these opportunities to think about why you're making the choices that you're making. So yes, dye, whatever plant is going to give you a beautiful color, but maybe be aware of what those associations are. So if you want to incorporate that intent, you can.
Yeah,
I love that. We talk about living a magical lifestyle, that your everyday activity can be with intent. And that's part of living a magical lifestyle. And you just said it so beautifully, Anna. I love it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I love it. Would this shop be successful, or do you think it'd be accepted outside Salem? Or do you think that Circle of Stitches could be anywhere?
You
It's an
know,
interesting question, but I thought it was a
it
cool
is an
one.
interesting question. And I think that it could be anywhere if done sort of right. That's kind of not a helpful thing to say, but in a lot of ways, like I used to feel like it was easier to be a witch anywhere other than Salem, because in Salem there's already so much expectation about what that means. But like if I go somewhere else and I'm the first witch, like I get to make it up, and so
You're the Laurie
that,
Cabot. You're the Laurie Cabot of
like somewhere
Moscow,
else,
Idaho.
right? Right. And so, like if you're going somewhere where that's not already something that exists, like you can create that. You can decide that that's what you want to offer people. I mean, maybe I wouldn't do it in a like super, super, super like conservative, like religious community. That might not go over so well, but I think it's all in how you're presenting it to people, because like, yes, my shop is super witchy, but when I'm creating things for, to share with other people, even though for me, witchcraft is my religious practice, I come at it from a very non-denominational perspective. I, try and put it together as tools for like mindfulness and meditation, so that it really can be for anyone who is looking for, sort of growth and healing. And it doesn't have to be like specific to one path. So, and I think that is something that you can do anywhere. I'm okay if people don't go off copying my shop too. Like that's okay.
Oh no, don't
be
copy.
Unique, people, be unique. That's right. Yeah. Inspiration, not knockoff. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, even like business wise, it would probably not be the greatest idea to open up a shop in like, I don't know, some country area, mainly because you probably won't have anyone interested in it and not a lot of people around. So
right, yeah, like don't open it in a town with like 20 people and they all go to like the one church in town. Like that's not gonna
yeah, be smart. Yeah, build yourself up for success, at least in some way.
You never know. I mean, we were just in a little tiny mining town, my husband's hometown in Western Pennsylvania, and there is a metaphysical, actually a witch shop, specifically gothy, black walls witch shop, and it is working. And the witch shop that opened like 45 minutes away in the other little town is not working, because the people who are very conservative religious have chased them out like several times. The people who've tried to open like a more of a like rainbow crystal shop have been run out by the conservatives, but this one is like a hardcore witch shop, and they're kind of associated with like
maybe they're so scary that like the people don't bother chasing them away, because it's like, oh, okay, well,
I think because they're kind of associated with the ghost tour people and the paranormal folks, and they've hooked into like the motorcycle riding type of people. So there's something that they've somehow have a niche that they're holding on to. It's just interesting how in some places it can work and in other places it can't. Yeah. And for reasons we don't always understand.
Yeah, there's one in Portsmouth, New Hampshire that I didn't think was going to succeed, a witch shop, and it seems to be doing well, because New Hampshire is surprisingly not as liberal as I expected when I moved up here. But
right. Yeah, like Christopher Penzak's Temple of Witchcraft is in New Hampshire.
Oh yeah, I know Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting, right? So I mean, it's basically he's in a suburb of Boston, but it's just over the border in New Hampshire. So.
Yeah. He and I have crossed paths a few times because of Laurie Cabot.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
Well, everyone should go to circleofstitches.com and buy everything. That's that's my recommendation. That's right. Is that
all the things?
One of all the things. Yes. Sign up for every. Yeah. So are you teaching classes online?
Yes. We developed like a full online programming because of COVID. I had always wanted to do it, and that really pushed me to do it. And I'm going to keep doing it. So I teach knitting and tarot online, and I'm definitely going to continue doing that. And I did want to tell you folks also about our Fiber Witch boxes, which is a collection that I started for Samhain last year. where like I curate a box that has like an exclusive hand-dyed yarn and sort of other goodies built around like whatever the festival is. So we did Samhain, we did winter solstice, we did spring equinox. What else? We've done I think like 5 of them so far. So the next one will be Samhain of this year. And so like it always comes with like a spell and like a bunch of, at least a spell, hand-dyed yarn, and then sort of other things that have been made especially for it. Like we did one for Litha where we had it was inspired by Festival of Roses, for Litha. So we had the custom hand-dyed yarn, and then my friend Rochelle designed this like rose-inspired fabric and hand-sewed bags for it. And then I had like needle gauges with like the matching pattern. So like they're like just these really cute sort of witchy like box sets that I just like pour my heart into. So
what? Katie, did you know about those?
I just heard about this new one that was coming out, but I didn't realize you had so many in the past. That is awesome.
I think Katie is about to buy those.
I'm like,
look at her
exploding with
face.
Excitement. I know.
I know.
What a great idea.
That
and
is
so
amazing.
much fun custom items in there too. That's so great.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. Like I just, I thought of them for Samhain last year, just as like maybe people want a little taste of Salem, and then people liked it, so I kept doing it. And then I started like offering a few more of them. And so far, like, people are happy. So.
Ooh, well, support her more and perhaps we'll get even more offerings. What do you think? Yay.
Okay. I love this box idea. I think that is such a great, like it's just so perfect. It's like, you don't have to think about it. You just get little awesome projects, something to do in there aligned with the Sabbath, aligned with the festival of the season. That really gets you in that mood, in that energy. That is fabulous. What a genius idea.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, like Jim said, you can find out more at circleofstitches.com, and it looks like you guys are also on like all the social medias, including Instagram, so make sure you go and follow them as well. Oh, Ana, this has been so amazing. Thank you so much for coming on to Knit a Spell.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been so fun chatting with you both.
Yay.
You are genius. It is so cool. I can't wait when we go to Salem to see you in person. We are just going to have a blast. At some point. Yes, I can't wait to visit.
Yeah, we'll make a special trip. It'll be great.
Yay.
Awesome. All right, Jim. Well, as always, you can find out more about Knit a Spell at knitaspell.com, and you can follow us along on Instagram as well. And if you're interested in learning more about my awesome co-host, James Devine, you can do so at thedivinehand.com or follow him on Instagram at divinehandjim.
And of course, Light from Lantern is where Katie hangs out. She has amazing patterns that you can knit, because that's what you do with a pattern for knitting, is you knit it. Sign up for her newsletter at lightfromlantern.com. Pretty brilliant.
Oh, thanks, everybody. Well, thank you again, Ana and Jim. And as always, we'll see you all next week. Yay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anna. Bye.
This episode is a wrap. If you enjoyed what you heard, go ahead and follow us on your favorite podcast streaming app. And don't forget, you can see full video episodes of Knit a Spell on Light from Lantern's YouTube channel.